So November 2019, in my opinion, is going to go down as one of the most interesting months in video game history, primarily because of two video games and backlash around these video games and backlash around the score of these video games. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this in the video game industry to date. But here we are. Obviously, this was all kicked off by Death Stranding. We talked about Death Stranding a week and a half ago or so on the channel, talking about the reviews of this game. This game is getting a lot of 9s and 9.5s out of 10s, but many reviewers were not really justifying their scores by saying the game was not fun and it wasn't really that cool of a game or anything like that. So people were very confused when these reviews were coming out because they couldn't really understand, how is this game getting such a high score, yet these reviews seem overly negative. And of course, since then, we've then moved on to the Pokemon controversy. Now, Pokemon Sword and Shield has had a lot more things going on the back end of things, more so than Death Stranding had. Death Stranding was a pretty cut and dry situation. It was Kojima's latest game. Whereas Pokemon Sword and Shield, there's been a lot of controversy around it. There's been controversy around things like the graphical style of the game. There's been controversy around the national dex being removed. We talked about some of those controversies last week on the channel. You guys seem to enjoy that video. But now, since then, there's been even more controversies around Pokemon Sword and Shield. That Game Freak lied about all new animations, or was it a mistranslation? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I feel like many people have gone down that rabbit hole. But of course, the Pokemon Sword and Shield reviews are now out. You can see them on Metacritic. You can see them on YouTube. And the Pokemon community, at least some members of it, are not happy with these reviews. These reviews have not been getting very good feedback. So I sort of just want to dive into these reviews, sort of like how we did with Death Stranding, and try to find some sort of conclusion and correlations between Death Stranding and Pokemon. Why these games are so polarizing and why you're getting so much feedback based on the reviews of these games, more so than really any other game this generation. Now, I do want to say that since doing my Death Stranding review, or my Death Stranding video, I have actually picked up Death Stranding. I wanted the little baby action figure thing because I think this is really bizarre and really cool. I like sending videos of this to random people on my phone and being like, look at my baby. But yeah, I have picked up Death Stranding and I played about 5 hours or so, so I'm not really super deep into the game, but I definitely see a good game out of Death Stranding. I don't think it's a 9 or a 9.5 out of 10 or anything like that. 7.5, 8, I could easily digest that. There are things I really like about Death Stranding. There are things that I just think are too confusing. The menu system is very cumbersome. Sometimes the animations feel a bit wonky when you're getting a lot of forward momentum and things like that. But I do think it's a solid game at its core. I could see it not being for everyone, definitely, but I think there are elements of that game to enjoy. But when you look at something like Pokemon, like I said, there's been a lot more controversy in the back end of the game with things like all these crazy hashtags going around. Did Game Freak rush this game? Is Game Freak losing their touch? And according to these reviews, they're not, but people seem to be sort of against these reviews. You can look here, some of the video reviews that have gone up today. Pokemon Sword and Shield review from IGN, a 42% like ratio. So people are not liking their review. Like, how are you not liking their review? What is wrong with the review? Is it the review itself, or you don't like the fact that they were overly positive about the game? Now, this review is sitting at 16,000 likes, 22,000 dislikes, nearly 500,000 views. And IGN is actually the highest rated score for Pokemon Sword and Shield, as we can see over here. GameSpot is at number 3, and oh look, the GameSpot review has 69% like ratio. Not nearly as bad as the Pokemon Sword and Shield review from IGN, but obviously people are upset about some Pokemon Sword and Shield related things. You see even Max, our good old buddy Dreamcast guy, chimed in on some of these reviews as well. But yeah, so obviously this is a very polarizing thing. So I want to look at these reviews and then try to see if we can come to some sort of conclusion as to why these reviews are being negatively perceived. Now, IGN says that Pokemon Sword and Shield are the best games in the series, streamlining its most tedious traditions without losing any of the charm. So the best game in the series, the best Pokemon games of all time. That's a lot. That's saying a lot. There have been some big classic Pokemon games over the years, even looking back to Pokemon Red and Blue, which was what I was all about as a kid. You know, those games were absolutely amazing to me. For IGN to say that these are the best in the series, the best in the franchise, that's a tall tale. Like, you've got to have some good stuff behind it. And from what a lot of people have seen, now you got to remember, most people have not played this game, but just basing it on what you've seen and basing it on things that you have heard about this game, it seems like a lot of people are disagreeing with this. Things like the national dex being removed, things like animations being recycled, things like the graphical style of the game not being all that graphically intense. Now, as far as a more in-depth look, we have GameSpot to look to. In collecting, battling, and exploring, Sword and Shield cut out the bloat and focus on what makes these pillars of these Pokemon games so captivating in the first place. You're not held back by overly complicated back-end systems or hoops to jump through. From the outset, you can start wandering the Galar region, seeing its new Pokemon and trying out its new battle strategies with very little in your way. This leaves you free to enjoy what Pokemon is all about and makes for an incredibly strong showing for the series' proper debut on the Switch. Now, I mean, if that's how they feel, that's how they feel. You can't really argue with someone's opinion on a game unless you feel that there's some sort of bias, and we'll get into any sort of potential bias going on in just a moment. Now, of course, we have to take a look at some of these other reviews. Game Informer, Pokemon Sword and Shield are strong first attempts for the series' full transition to consoles. While some frustrations hold it back from true legendary status, this new generation proves the Pokemon franchise is still great more than 2 decades later. You can see here, there's a lot of positive scores going on here. It's currently at an 81 on Metacritic, which, you know, that's a really good score. You shouldn't, you know, downplay like an 8 or anything like that in today's gaming standards. You know, a 5 is technically a mediocre game. That is a middle of the road game. We have this notion as, you know, consumers that anything like below a 7 is like automatically like one of the worst games of all time. And I think that's just because of our, you know, a need for scores and need for review scores and need to thrive on these scores. Now, you might notice here, one of the highest rated reviews is coming to us from Nintendo Life with a 91% like ratio. So what did Nintendo Life have to say about the game? Well, they actually gave the game an 80 out of 100 or an 8 out of 10. Pokemon Sword and Shield succeed in bringing some new ideas to the table, but they're also somewhat guilty of not pushing things far enough. What's done right is done right, but what's done wrong feels like it's come from a decade-old design document. There are moments contained within that are the best the series has ever seen, but this joy is at sometimes spoiled by contrasting moments that left us disappointed and did not match up with the rest of these games can offer. What we've got here is an experience full of highs and lows, from the unadulterated wonder and joy of seeing brand new Pokemon in a stadium full of cheering crowds to the monotonous dragged out dialogue we just want to skip. And honestly, that to me sounds like a very, very fair review. You know, they're looking at the positives, they're looking at the negatives, and then they're finding that middle ground. Do the positives outweigh the negatives? If so, how much do the positives outweigh the negatives? Obviously, no game is ever a truly perfect game, but if those positives can outweigh those negatives, then that should be indicative of the score and what is being said in the review. So I like this Nintendo Life little snippet here. Now let's look at the very bottom of the barrel. What is getting the worst scores? We see that we have 2 6 out of 10s or 60s. VG247, Pokemon Sword and Shield is all too often a bit disappointing, and in some places actually feels a bit unfinished, but it also provides that warm fuzzy feeling that one expects from the series. Crucially, even through frustration, never once did I think about putting it down, which is to its credit. And then the Daily Star. Pokemon Sword and Shield are not bad games, but fun character arcs and inventive creative designs of new Mon are often offset by poor pacing and restrictive world design. The world of Galar is charming and is Pokemon's interpretation of Britain I've dreamed of since I was a kid, but between gating what Pokemon you can catch behind gym badges, some half-baked route and cycle or city designs, and a modest amount of post-game content, Sword and Shield can only be called good Pokemon games, not great ones. So really, much like Death Stranding, we are seeing a very split base here. We're seeing a lot of positives, a lot of highs, and some lows. And of course, the positives, the overly positive ones, much like we saw with Death Stranding, are being met with critical reception. IGN, the most positive, is the, you know, most disliked Pokemon Sword and Shield review on YouTube right now. The second most disliked one is the third highest. The middle of the road one, which was Nintendo's Life, giving it an 8 out of 10, is the highest liked one. So what is that to say about both Death Stranding and of course Pokemon? I feel like, and I'm gonna catch some heat from this, and that's okay, you know, maybe my video will end up looking like IGN's more so than Nintendo Life's, even though I would like to see those sort of likes on this video. I honestly feel like that both Kojima and Pokemon are getting passes somewhat based on their pedigree, based on their back catalog, based on the notoriety of a Kojima game and of a Pokemon game. I mean, let's be real here. I do not think Death Stranding is a 9.5 out of 10 from what I've played so far. I think it's a solid 8. I think if any other company had made it, it would be a solid 8. But because the name Hideo Kojima is on this, because of the great story of him leaving Konami and breaking from the shackles of Konami and then going out on his own and making a game he always wanted to make, make, it ends up putting it a bit on a pedestal, so people have a bit of a bias towards it. It's the same thing with Pokemon. Pokemon has become this huge yearly franchise, even sometimes bi-yearly, with offshoot games and things like that, and people hold Pokemon games to such a high standard. Now what you're seeing is the fact that essentially Pokemon has been very, very similar for the past 20 years. If you played Pokemon Red, you will still feel comfortable playing a modern Pokemon game. Sure, it's grown, sure, it's expanded, there's been more Pokemon, there's been some more moves added, there's been some more additions to the game, but the core game remains the same. Now, how fresh can that core game really remain after 20 plus years? People are getting to a point where maybe they want to see the full-on evolution of Pokemon. I talked about this in my Pokemon controversy video. People want to see a Pokemon game really pushing a system to its limits, but I feel like Game Freak, the company, isn't equipped to do that. Looking at Game Freak as a company, they have been a company that makes handheld games. While all these companies were entering the HD era in 2006, what was Game Freak doing? Game Freak was making Game Boy Advance games and then moving on to the Nintendo DS. So because of this, Game Freak as a company never really fully embraced the HD and revolution. Look at even Nintendo. Nintendo took their time getting into HD games with the Wii U, and then once they got their foothold with the Wii U, look at all the great HD games you've gotten on the Switch. I just feel like Game Freak may be stretching themselves too thin. The Pokemon company could be putting too much emphasis on these games always coming out, and because of this, fans of these franchises and fans of the Pokemon franchise are starting to demand more. Now, obviously, some people are taking it to very high extremes and things like that, and that's never a good thing. You don't want to create all these stupid hashtags, trying to out Pokemon people and harassing them and things like that. But I think if you focus on the games themselves, I think you could probably make a case that yes, maybe this game is a bit rushed. I feel like Nintendo Life's review is probably going to be similar to how I feel about this game, just basing it on what we have seen so far, everything we've learned about it so far. So it's been a crazy month. It has been a crazy month for controversy concerning reviews for games, these huge games, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen before, but it's definitely very fascinating. Now, at the end of the day, Pokemon Sword and Shield is going to sell like hotcakes. Like, let's be real here. Everyone is going to buy this game, so it's going to sell so many Nintendo Switch systems, but you feel like you're maybe getting to a breaking point with the Pokemon series, and at some point, I feel like you are going to see this breaking point, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be this game, but I feel like if the next mainline Pokemon entry really doesn't sort of, stretch itself out and really sort of jump leaps and bounds, you might start seeing some more backlash, and you might actually end up seeing some decrease in sales as well. But those are just my thoughts on this whole review situation. It's obviously been very crazy. I just kind of wanted to share this with you guys, give you guys my thoughts as someone who's followed the video game industry since a wee little tyke. So let me know in the comments section down below what you think of this whole situation. Where do you sort of stand on this? Do you think that companies like Kojima and the Pokemon company do get their games put on a bit of a higher pedestal because of biases to their previous entries of games and what they've done for the gaming industry? Do you feel like they're maybe a bit overrated in terms of how their games are reviewed by critics, or do you think that these are genuine reviews and people are just really enjoying these games that some other people are like, I don't understand that? And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.